There was a beacon at the edge of human space, and it had been screaming the same word into the dark for 400 years. It did not scream in sound, because sound cannot cross a vacuum, and it did not scream in any single language, because the thing it warned had to be understood by anyone who came near it. Instead, it wrote itself into every band a starship could hear: radio, gravitic pulse, quantum whisper, the old light lasers, even the crude thermal flicker that the most primitive scouts could still read. And in each of those bands it said the same thing, translated into 600 tongues and one universal set of symbols that any species with eyes and a survival instinct could parse. Turn back, this is human space. You have been warned. Below that smaller, almost gentle, a second line: we will not warn you twice. The beacon was not a weapon. It was a courtesy. That was the part the galaxy never quite believed, and the part that got so many of them killed. Kael Vurr had grown up hearing about the beacon the way other children heard about monsters under floors and gods behind stars. He was Draven, of the Ascendant Draven Imperium, and in the Imperium a child was taught 3 things before he was taught to walk: that the Draven were the eldest of the starfaring peoples, that the galaxy was a garden, and the Draven were its rightful gardeners, and that fear was a disease of lesser minds. Kael had believed all 3, because a boy believes what the men above him need to be true. He was young, barely into the age when a Draven male was permitted to bear a rank glyph on his throat plate, and he had been assigned to the 6th Incursion Fleet as a signals adjutant, which was a polite imperial word for a boy who read messages and brought them to men who mattered. He had not asked for the posting. His bloodline had asked for it, because the Vurr line had produced admirals for 9 generations, and the current generation had produced only Kael, and a Vurr who never went to war was a stain that outlived the man who made it. So Kael Vurr stood on the observation gallery of the flagship Undying Meridian, one hand pressed flat against the cold transparency of the hull, and watched the beacon of human space grow from a point to a spike to a monument. It was enormous. That was the first thing that was wrong with it. The Draven built things to be seen: spires, banners, cities that spelled the Imperium's name in orbital light, but they built them for glory. The humans had built this thing for reach. It was ugly, functional, a black obelisk the length of a moon, studded with antennae like the spines of something that had never needed to be beautiful because it had only ever needed to be heard. And around it, in a slow and patient orbit, drifted the wreckage. Kael had been told about the wreckage in his briefings, but the briefings had used the word debris, and debris was a word for scattered things. This was not scattered. This was arranged. Someone had gathered the broken hulls of everyone who had ignored the beacon and set them in a ring around it, prow-out, so that any ship approaching would pass through a gauntlet of the dead before it reached the warning itself. He recognized some of them. Every Draven cadet studied the great extinctions of the lesser species, and here they were, hull by hull, a museum of arrogance. The mirrored petals of a Suli lightweaver cracked down its axis. The segmented wormhull of a Chthonian harvester, its 1,000 cabins open to the void like a picked carcass. And there, largest of all, the vitrified corpse of a Volgai dreadnought, the Volgai, who had once ruled a third of the galactic rim, who had come to human space with a war host of 11,000 ships and left with none. The dreadnought's flank was fused smooth, melted and refrozen, and across it, etched by some human hand into the very metal, were words in the Volgai script. Kael's translator whispered them to him. They were warned. Adjutant, the voice belonged to War Master Sesh Dralvan, and Kael turned from the glass so fast his throat plate clicked. Dralvan was the reason the 6th Incursion Fleet existed. He was old in the way that predators are old, all economy and scar, and he had never in his 4 centuries of command lost a world he wanted. He wanted this one. He wanted all of them. You are staring at scrap. War Master, Kael lowered his eye ridges in the submission posture. The beacon, it is transmitting. It has been transmitting for 400 years, boy. It transmitted at the Volgai and at the Suli, and at every carrion race too weak to press past a threat. Draven came to stand beside him, and he did not look at the beacon. He looked at Kael, which was worse. Do you know why they all died? Because the humans were stronger, Warmaster. No, the Warmaster's mouthplate spread in the expression the Draven used for contempt. Because they believed the warning. A warning is a wall built of fear, adjutant. It holds only as long as no one leans on it. The Volgai came with 11,000 ships and the humans broke them, yes. But do you know how many ships the humans had? Kael did not. Neither do I, said Draven softly. Neither does anyone, because the Volgai who might have counted them are dead and the humans do not say. That is the whole trick of it. They have hidden their strength behind a story, and every fool who believes the story dies before he can measure it. The Volgai believed. The Suli believed. He turned, finally, to face the black obelisk and the ring of ruined ships. We will not believe. We will measure. And when we have measured, we will find that the wall is a wall of paint, and we will walk through it, and the galaxy will learn that the age of the human ghost story is over. And the age of the Draven is the only age there ever was. It was a good speech. Kael's blood crest lifted despite itself. He was young, and he wanted to believe in something enormous, and here was the oldest and greatest of the Draven telling him that fear was a lie, and the future belonged to those who refused it. In that moment, on the gallery of the undying meridian, with the wreckage of ancient empires turning slowly past the glass, Kael Vurr believed the Warmaster completely. He would spend the rest of his short life unlearning it. The 6th incursion fleet was 412 warships, and it crossed the human threshold at the 9th hour of the Draven cycle, in full formation, transponders blazing, so that there could be no question of stealth or accident. Draven had insisted on it. We do not sneak into a garden we intend to own, he had said. We announce ourselves. Let them see the whole of us. Let their storytellers try to frighten children with a shadow that 400 ships have already stepped over. They passed the beacon. They passed the ring of the dead. And the beacon changed its message. Kael was at his signal station when it happened, and he felt the change before he understood it, because every screen in the signal's pit flickered at once as the fleet's receivers caught the new transmission and did not know what to do with it. The old warning cut off mid-word. And into the silence on every band in perfect and unhurried Draveni, not the trade tongue, not the diplomatic register, but the high imperial dialect that only the Draven themselves spoke, the dialect of the throne, a human voice began to speak. It was a young voice. That was what Kael would remember later in the places where later happened. It was not a war drum voice or a god voice. It sounded like someone his own age, someone tired, reading a thing they had read many times before to people who never listened. Ascendant Draven Imperium, the voice said, 6th Incursion Fleet. Warmaster Sesh Draven commanding, we see you. We have been expecting you for 11 of your years since your survey drones crossed the Uman Reach and you thought we did not notice. We know your fleet. We know your names. We know that Kael Vurr, Signal's adjutant, is reading this transmission right now because he is the one who reads them all. Kael's hands went still on the console. Around him, the Signal's pit had gone silent. Someone had turned to look at him. We are telling you this, the human voice continued, not to frighten you. Fear is your word. We do not have it in the same size you do. We are telling you this so that when it is over, you will know that we knew. You crossed a line that 400 years and 11 empires told you not to cross. You did it on purpose. You did it to prove that the line was not real. A pause. When the voice came back, it was gentler, and somehow that was the worst thing Kael had ever heard. The line is real. We drew it in the wreckage of everyone who did not believe it. You will not be the exception. You will be the example. Turn back now, Warmaster, and we will let the ships that turn back leave. This is the last mercy we are required to offer. After this transmission ends, we are not required to offer anything at all. The transmission ended. For a long moment the signals pit did not breathe. Then, from the command tier above, Kael heard the War Master laugh, a low, satisfied sound, the sound of a man who has just been handed exactly the enemy he wanted. "They know my name," Draven said to no one and to everyone. "Good, then they know who ended them, Adjutant Vurr." Kael straightened. "War Master." "Send them my reply. Send it in their own tongue on every band so that their frightened children can hear it too." The War Master's voice filled the pit like cold water. "Tell them, we have measured your wall. We find it hollow. Draven does not turn back. Draven does not turn. Come and prove your story, or admit at last that it was only ever a story." And when they answer nothing, because they will answer nothing, boy, ghosts have no reply, take us in, all of us, straight to their nearest world. We will be standing on it by the end of the cycle. Kael sent the reply. His claws shook very slightly as he did it, and he told himself it was the cold. The humans answered nothing, just as the War Master had said. The 6th Incursion Fleet advanced into human space, 412 ships in perfect formation, and the dark ahead of them stayed dark, and empty and silent, and Kael Vurr sat in the middle of that silence, with a feeling he did not yet have a word for, because in the Imperium they had taught him that the feeling was a disease, and he had never before been sick. The first world was called Heskett by the humans, and the fleet's charts called it Target Primary, and it was 3 days inward at the fleet's cruising fold. 3 days is a long time in a silence. Kael filled it the way a young officer fills anything with duty, with the small rituals of the signals pit, with the endless scanning of bands that gave back nothing. He told himself the nothing was good. Nothing meant no fleet massing to meet them. Nothing meant the humans had no answer. He said this to the other adjutants, and they agreed too quickly, and he understood that they were saying it to themselves as much as to him, that the whole pit had become a room full of young Draven reassuring each other that emptiness was a kind of victory. But the emptiness was not empty. That was the thing Kael could not make the others see, and could barely make himself believe. On the 2nd day, the fleet's outer scouts began to fail. Not to die, not dramatically. They simply stopped. A scout drone would fold ahead of the formation, take up its patrol arc, transmit its clean all clear, and then on the next scheduled report transmit nothing. No distress, no weapon signature, no debris. The drone was there, and then the drone was a silence shaped like a drone, and when the fleet folded past the coordinates hours later there was nothing to recover, not even wreckage, as if the machine had been unwritten from the universe. Kael brought the pattern to the command tier himself, because he was the one who read the messages, and this was a message even if it was made of missing things. "War Master, we have lost 11 scouts. No engagement recorded. They are simply," he searched for a word that would not sound like the disease, "removed." Draven studied the scatter of vanished coordinates on the great tactical display, and Kael watched him look for the pattern that a lesser mind would find. A minefield, an ambush lane, a predictable geometry that could be mapped and countered and turned into a story about Draven cleverness overcoming a human trap. There was no pattern. The vanishings were everywhere and nowhere, ahead and to the flanks and once, impossibly, behind, in a region the fleet had already crossed and left clean. "They are picking at our edges," the War Master said at last. "It is what the weak do. They cannot meet us, so they nibble." He said it with confidence, and the officers around him took the confidence gratefully, and Kael almost took it too. "Pull the scouts in. Tighten the formation. We do not need eyes ahead when we know exactly where we are going. 3 more folds and we are over their world." "War Master," Kael said, and then stopped, because he did not have a rank high enough to finish the sentence he was thinking, which was, "They are not nibbling. They are counting. They are removing our eyes one at a time so that we go the last distance blind, and they are doing it so gently that we will thank them for the quiet." He did not say it. He pulled the scouts in, and the fleet went on tighter now, 400 ships packed close for comfort in a dark that had begun, very quietly, to eat them. That night the fleet kept a night, an artificial dimming of the ship's cycle for the sake of Draven blood, which still remembered a sun. Kael did not dim his station. He sat in the low red light of the signals pit, and he listened to the bands, all of them, one by one, the way you listen to a house when you are alone in it, and you are not sure you are alone. And on the oldest band, the crudest one, the thermal flicker that the beacon had used to reach the most primitive scouts, he found the human voice again. It was not broadcasting to the fleet. That was what stopped his breath. It was not a warning or a threat or a reply. It was a private thing, a low transmission on a channel no war fleet should have been listening to, and Kael had only found it because he was young and sleepless and afraid, and he had been searching the dark for something the way a child searches it for the shape of the thing that will not let him sleep. The young human voice was talking to someone, and it was talking about him. The adjutant Vurr, he's the one who keeps scanning. Bright kid, he already knows. You can hear it in the way he pulls his scouts. He knows and they won't let him say it. A pause, the sound of the human breathing. I hate this part. I hate that they make us do it slow. I know it's the point, I know slow is the whole point, but the young one on that ship didn't do anything. He just got born into the wrong empire and put on the wrong ship, and now he has to watch. Another voice, older, answered. Kael's translator caught only fragments, the channel breaking up. Not our choice how they learn, only that they learn. He can still turn his ship around, same as any of them. The mercy's still open to anyone who takes it. He can't turn his ship around. He's a signals adjutant. He doesn't command anything. Then he'll watch, and he'll live if he's the kind that lives. And he'll tell it right after, which is more than the War Master will do. The older voice paused. That's why we let the young ones read the transmission, Sable. So there's someone left who understood it. Now get some rest. It starts at the third world's shadow, and I want you sharp. The channel went dead. Kael Vurr sat in the red dark for a long time. He did not tell anyone what he had heard. There was no one to tell who would not report him for listening to human whispers in the night, and no one who would believe that the enemy, the ghost, the story, the wall of paint, had sounded for a moment sad. Sad about him. About a Draveny boy on a Draven warship, whom it had somehow decided did not deserve what was coming, and could not save, and would let live only so that the truth would have a mouth. He thought about the phrase the human had used. It starts at the third world's shadow. The fleet's charts did not list a third world on the approach to Heskett. There was Target Primary and its 2 moons, and beyond that empty space, and beyond that the fold point home. Kael pulled up the deep survey, the old Draven charts from before the incursion, the ones assembled from the drones that had crossed the Reach 11 years ago. There on the very edge of the Heskett system, so far out and so cold that it had been catalogued and forgotten, a third world, a dark one. No sun warmth, no atmosphere the drones could read, nothing to make it worth a war. The survey had a single note appended to it, in the flat hand of some long-dead Draven cartographer. Designation, Forge, human installation, purpose unknown, approach not advised. Kael read the note 3 times. Then he looked at the fleet's plotted course, the tight, bright line the War Master had drawn straight and proud toward Target Primary, and he saw that the line passed at its narrowest through the shadow of the third world. The dark one, the Forge. It starts at the third world's shadow. He was young, and he was afraid, and for the first time in his life he understood that the fear was not a disease. It was the last honest sense he had left. Everyone else on the undying meridian had cut theirs out to please the men above them. Kael had almost done the same. He kept his. It was the only reason he lived. He tried to warn them anyway. Not the War Master. A signals adjutant did not carry warnings to a War Master twice, not when the first had already earned him a long, cold look. But there was a chain of command between Kael and the throne of the flagship, and he climbed one link of it, to Sub-Commander Orit Vanith, who oversaw the signals tier and who had, on 2 occasions, spoken to Kael as if he were a person and not a function. Vanith listened. That was more than Kael had hoped for. He listened to the vanishing scouts, and the private channel, and the third world called Forge with its old cartographer's note. And when Kael was done, the sub-commander sat very still for a while, and something moved behind his eyes that Kael recognized, because he had felt it himself in the red dark. "You listened to an enemy transmission you were not cleared to hear," Vanith said finally, "and you brought it to me instead of to security, which means you trust me, which is a foolish thing for a young officer to do, and I will pretend you did not do it." He leaned forward. "Now I will tell you something, and you will pretend I did not say it. I have flown with the War Master for 90 years. He has never lost. Do you understand what that does to a man? It makes him certain, Sub-Commander. It makes him unable to imagine losing. Those are not the same. A man who has never lost does not stop believing he can lose, he stops being able to picture it, the way you cannot picture a color you have never seen." Vanith looked at the deck plates. "I have tried to picture us losing this. I cannot. And I have been trying for 3 days, Adjutant, which is 3 days longer than the War Master has spent on it, and I still cannot, and that frightens me more than your vanishing scouts. Because if I cannot imagine it, and the humans have imagined nothing else for 400 years, then they know a shape of this that I do not." He straightened. The moment closed like a hatch. "But I cannot turn 400 ships on the word of a boy and a whisper," he said. "You know that. The War Master would have my crest for it, and rightly, because command that bends to fear is no command at all. What I can do is small. I can wake the point defense grids early. I can put the fleet on close watch through the third world's shadow and blame it on the scouts, and no one will question caution near a dark installation. It is not much. But if you are right, Adjutant, it may be the difference between 400 ships and 300. It was more than Kael had dared to ask for. He lowered his eye ridges as deep as they would go. "You are welcome," said Vanith. "And Vurr, if you are right, do not say you were. A young officer who is right when his elders are wrong does not get thanked. He gets remembered. Now go read your bands, and when the shadow comes, watch it for me." The shadow came at the 11th hour. The fleet was in tight formation. 412 ships in the great arrowhead the Draven had used since before they left their first world, and the dark world called Forge swung slowly into their path, not across their course, but along it, a cold black coin sliding between the fleet and the distant point of light that was target primary. For a span of perhaps 40 minutes the whole fleet would pass through its long shadow, that cone of extra dark where even the far sun's thin light did not reach. Kael watched the shadow the way Vanith had asked him to, every band. All of them, his claws hovered over the alert glyph. For the first 30 minutes, nothing. He had almost begun to hope, the terrible hope of the young, that the frightening thing will simply not arrive, when the oldest band, the thermal flicker, gave him a single word. Not to the fleet, to no one. A private note dropped into the dark like a stone into a well, and Kael's translator, still tuned to that channel from the night before, caught it before he could stop it. The young human voice, one word, now. Kael slammed the alert glyph. Nothing happened for a heartbeat, and then the third world woke up. It was not a fleet. Kael understood that in the first instant, and the understanding was worse than any fleet would have been. The humans had not hidden a war host in the dark world's shadow. They had hidden the dark world itself, or rather what the dark world was, which was not a world at all but the largest single manufactured object Kael Vurr had ever seen or would ever see. The whole black coin of it, moon-sized, split along seams that had been invisible, and light poured out of the seams, not weapons light, not yet, but the deep furnace orange of something that had been kept banked and hot for 400 years and was now, all at once, being fed. The old cartographer had written the truth and not known it. Forge. It was a factory. a war factory the size of a moon, and it had been sitting in the cold dark on the exact line every invader had to cross to reach the human world beyond it, and it had been waiting, banked, since before the Volgai came. It did not need to hide a fleet. It made the fleet. As Kael watched, as the entire sixth incursion sat frozen for the 2 seconds it takes a certain mind to refuse what its eyes report, the forge began to give birth. They came out of the furnace seams by the thousand, and they were small, each one no larger than a Draven scout, blunt and ugly and utterly without ornament, and they moved wrong. Draven ships moved like ships, in the disciplined geometry of a fleet. These moved like a poured liquid, like a thing spilled, filling the space ahead of the fleet not in formation but in flood, and they did not slow, and they did not hail, and they did not answer the frantic challenge pulses the fleet's picket ships were throwing into the dark. "Weapons free," the War Master's voice on every channel, and for once there was no laughter in it. "All ships, weapons free, break their charge, show them what 400 years of ghosts is worth against Draven steel." The sixth incursion fleet was the finest instrument of war the Ascendant Draven Imperium had ever forged, and Kael watched it do everything right. The point defense grid's Vanith had woken early, caught the first wave and shredded it, thousands of the little ugly machines coming apart in silent blossoms of fire, and a ragged cheer went up in the signals pit, and for one bright and lying moment it looked like the War Master had been right after all. The wall was paint. The ghost was a machine that could be shot. Then the second wave came out of the forge, and it was larger than the first, because the forge had spent the time it took to lose the first wave building the second, and it was building the third while the second flew, and Kael understood with a cold that went all the way to his spine that he was not watching a battle. He was watching arithmetic. The Draven fleet was a fixed number. 412, minus whatever the dark had already eaten. Every ship it lost was gone. Every weapon it fired drew down a magazine that could not be refilled out here, days from any Draven port. It was a closed fist, and a fist can only hit so many times. The forge was not a number. The forge was a rate. It did not care how many of its children the fleet destroyed, because it made them faster than they died, and each wave was larger than the last, and it would keep making them until the raw dark world beneath it was spent, and a world is a great deal of raw material. The Draven were not fighting an enemy. They were fighting a sum that grew, and every second they survived made the next second worse. "They cannot sustain this," Dralvan was saying on the command channel, and Kael heard in the old War Master's voice for the first time in 90 years the thin edge of a man reaching for a story to stand on. "It is a spasm, a last defense. Punch through it, punch through to the factory and burn it and the waves stop. Adjutant Vurr, the source. Where is the source?" Kael's hands were already moving. He fed the targeting solution to the command tier, the forge, the seams, the furnace hearts pouring light, and the fleet turned as one great beast and threw everything it had at the moon-sized factory that was killing it. And the forge took it. That was the moment Kael Vurr stopped being young, though he went on living for a while longer. He watched 400 Draven warships pour the full fury of the Imperium into the Black World's flank, enough fire to crack a planet, enough to end a lesser species entirely, and he watched the forge's outer shell drink it. The armor was not armor. It was more furnace. The fleet's weapons hit it, and the energy did not shatter the thing. It fed it, poured into the intakes the humans had built for exactly this, and the seams glowed brighter, and the next wave that came out was the largest yet, and it came out hot. The humans had built a factory that ate the attacks meant to destroy it, and turned them into more of the thing attacking you. They had spent 400 years perfecting the single cruelest shape a war can take. The more you fight, the more there is to fight, and the only way to make it stop is to have never begun. On the private channel, so quiet Kael almost missed it under the roar of a dying fleet, the young human voice spoke once more. It was not gloating. Kael would swear that to the end. It was almost gentle, the way you are gentle with a thing that is about to understand something terrible. There it is, the human said. Now they see it. Now the adjutant sees it. Hold the forge steady, all crews. Don't push. Don't chase the ones that run. We warned them. Let the ones who turn back turn back. Everyone else, this is what the beacon means. Kael looked at his board. Of 412 ships, 31 had already stopped answering. The rest were fighting brilliantly, magnificently, exactly as trained, and it was buying them nothing but the privilege of a slightly later death. He looked up at the command tier, at the silhouette of War Master Sesh Dralvan against the tactical display, and he saw the old predator standing perfectly still while his fleet burned, and he understood that Vanith had been right. The War Master was not afraid. The War Master still, even now, could not imagine losing. He was watching 400 years of ghost stories come true in front of him, and his mind simply would not let the picture in. "Sub-Commander," Kael said, on the signal's tier's private line, and his voice did not shake, which surprised him. "The waves are increasing on a curve. I have it plotted. If the curve holds, they overwhelm the point defense grids in 19 minutes. After that, it is not a battle. It is a harvest." Vanith's answer came slow and heavy. "I have the same number, Adjutant. 19 minutes. A pause. The War Master will not order the turn. He cannot. You understand that now. He will fight until the last ship, because in his mind there is no last ship. There is only the next victory that has not arrived yet. And when the fleet is gone, he will still be waiting for it." Another pause, longer. "So it falls to smaller men to do the thing the Great One cannot imagine. Vurr. I am going to do something that will end me either way. I need you to send a transmission for me, on my authority, before the War Master's staff can countermand it. Can you do that?" Kael's claw hovered over the console. Every instinct 9 generations of Vurr admirals had bred into him screamed that a sub-commander did not override a War Master in the middle of a battle, that this was mutiny, that his bloodline would wear the stain until the stars went cold. 19 minutes. "I can do it," Kael said. "Then send this on all Draven bands, priority absolute, my glyph and my authority, to all ships of the 6th incursion. The objective is untenable. The enemy cannot be penetrated, only fed. Any ship able to break fold is ordered to withdraw to the beacon threshold and hold. Withdrawal is not dishonor. The dishonor was coming here. Go now. Vanith. Kael sent it. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then, across the tactical display, Kael watched the fleet break, not in panic, not yet, but in the ragged, uneven way of disciplined ships being given permission, at last, to save themselves. A dozen ships peeled from the burning arrowhead and turned their prows toward home. Then a dozen more. The formation, which had held for 400 years of Draven history, came apart into individual desperate lives, each one folding for the threshold and the beacon and the ring of the dead that had tried, 400 years ago, to tell them all this exact thing. And on the command tier, War Master Sesh Dralvan turned from the display and looked down through the transparent floor into the signals pit, and found, unerringly, the single station that had sent the order that broke his fleet. He found Kael. "You," the War Master said. He did not shout it. He did not need to. The command channel carried it into every helmet and every station, and the whole burning fleet heard the oldest voice in the Imperium find the youngest throat aboard. "The order carried Vanith's glyph," Dralvan said. "But Vanith does not touch a console. Vanith has not sent his own transmission in 90 years. There is one hand on this ship that sends what the signals tier is told to send, and that hand is yours, Adjutant. You broke my fleet." A boy with a rank glyph, barely dry on his throat, broke the 6th incursion fleet. The signals pit had gone utterly silent around Kael. The other adjutants had drawn back from him as if his station were on fire. On the tactical display behind the War Master, ships kept peeling away toward home, and the forge kept pouring its children into the space where the fleet had been, and the arithmetic ground on, indifferent to the small tribunal happening at its heart. Kael stood up. He did not remember deciding to. His legs simply lifted him, the way fear had lifted him toward the truth 3 nights ago in the red dark, and he faced the shadow of the War Master through the transparent deck, and he was so young, and he spoke. "I broke a fleet that was already breaking, War Master." His voice carried. He had not known it could carry like that. "You are watching 400 years come true, and you cannot see it because you have never lost, and a man who has never lost cannot picture the thing in front of his eyes. Sub-Commander Vanith could picture it. He gave the order because you could not. I sent it because he asked me to. And if we had not, every ship out there would be dead in 19 minutes, instead of 200 of them living to carry home the only thing that matters now." "And what," said Draven very softly, "is the only thing that matters now?" "The truth," Kael said, "that the beacon was not a story, that the wall was not paint. That the humans told the galaxy the exact and literal truth for 400 years and 11 empires died, because the truth sounded too much like a threat to be believed. Someone has to carry that home, War Master. Someone has to be the mouth. That is the only victory left in this system, and you are about to throw it away for the chance to be the last ship the Forge unmakes." For a long moment the old War Master said nothing, and Kael, watching him, saw the thing he had not expected to see, the thing that made him understand at last why the humans had chosen to warn and warn and warn rather than simply kill. He saw Draven begin, for the first time in 90 years, to imagine losing. It broke something in the old Predator. Not his pride was made of harder stuff than that. It broke the certainty, the great unblinking engine of victory that had carried him across 4 centuries and 1,000 conquered worlds, and behind it, exposed, was just a very old man watching everything he had ever believed come apart in furnace light. "Vanith," the War Master said, not to Kael now, to the sub-commander wherever he stood in the burning ship, "is the boy right?" "He is, War Master." Vanith's voice was steady. "I have run it 40 ways. There is no penetration. There is only feeding. Every shot we take makes them stronger. It is the most perfect defense that has ever been built, and it is perfect because it costs them nothing and it costs us everything. And the only move that wins is the move we made 400 years ago when the beacon told us not to come." The undying Meridian shuddered. A wave had reached it, the little ugly machines swarming the flagship's flanks, not firing, Kael realized, not most of them, just striking, ramming, spending themselves against the hull because the Forge could always make more and the flagship could not make more hull. It was death by multiplication. It was being buried alive in a thing that grew. "Then give the order yourself, old friend," Draven said, and there was something almost peaceful in it now. "You have earned the right to be the one who says it." "I have not. I earned only the right to be the one who should have listened." "The order is given," Vanith said. "All ships that can fold, fold. The Meridian is too deep in the swarm to break clean. She will not make the threshold." "No," the War Master agreed. "She will not." A pause. Adjutant Vurr. Kael straightened. "War Master." "There is a courier skiff in the flagship's aft bay. Fold capable. 1 pilot, 1 passenger. It was meant to carry my victory dispatch home." A sound that might in a younger man have been a laugh. "It will carry a different dispatch now. You are the mouth, you said. Then go be the mouth. Take the skiff. Take the battle logs, the Forge scans, the transmission the humans sent us, all of it. Fold for the threshold and do not stop and do not look back. Carry the truth home, Kael Vurr, because you are the only one aboard young enough to be believed when you say the ghost stories were real." "War Master," Kael's throat closed. "The flagship, you the sub-commander. We'll hold the swarm off the aft bay long enough for you to fold," Draven finished. "It is the last thing a flagship is good for when the fleet is gone. Do not waste it, boy. That is an order from a War Master, and it is the last one I will ever give that is worth obeying." His voice hardened into the old command iron one final time. "Go." Kael went. He did not remember the run to the aft bay. He remembered fragments, the flagship shuddering as the swarm buried her, the emergency lighting, a crewman he did not know pressing a data core into his hands and saying, "Everything's on it, all of it, go." And then the courier skiff, small and cold and blessedly empty, and his own claws moving across an unfamiliar console with a speed he had not known he possessed. And he remembered Vanith's voice, one last time on the private line, as the skiff's bay doors ground open onto the furnace-lit dark. "You did the thing the great man could not, adjutant. Remember that it was not courage. It was that you never cut out your fear and so you could still see. Tell them that when you tell it. Tell them the humans did not beat us with strength. They beat us with a truth we were too proud to hear. Now fold, and Vurr, the smallest pause, tell it right." The skiff dropped from the aft bay into a sky full of dying. Kael Vurr folded for the threshold, and he did not look back. And behind him, the undying Meridian and War Master Sesh Dralvan and Sub-Commander Orit Vanith held the swarm off his tail, until the flagship's hull could no longer be told from the swarm that buried it. And then there was a light. And then there was nothing where the greatest warship of the Ascendant Draven Imperium had been. The skiff was fast. That was the one mercy of the whole design. A War Master's courier was built to carry victory home ahead of any pursuit, and now it carried the opposite, but it carried it just as fast. Kael folded for the threshold in a series of short, desperate jumps, and behind him the Heskett system fell away, and the forge and the graveyard the sixth incursion had become. For a long time he did not think. He piloted. He watched his aft sensors for the swarm, and the swarm did not come, and slowly, over hours, he understood why. The humans were not chasing him. They had told him they would let the ships that turned back go. He was a ship that had turned back. They were keeping their word, the same word they had kept for 400 years, the word every empire had mistaken for a bluff. He wept somewhere in there. He was not ashamed of it. There was no one to see, and Vanith had already told him that the fear he had never cut out was the only thing that had let him survive, and so he let himself feel the rest of it too. The grief, the terror, the vast and vertiginous horror of having watched the Ascendant Draven Imperium's finest fleet fed into a furnace one wave at a time. And then, when the weeping was done, he did the thing Vanith had told him to do. He began to tell it right. He opened the data core and he read everything, the battle logs, the forge scans. He made himself understand the machine that had killed his fleet, not so that the Imperium could build one. You could not build one. That was the point. You could only build one if you had spent 400 years being the kind of people who would rather warn than kill. But so that he could explain, when he got home, exactly why the ghost stories were true. He found the human transmission, the one that had opened the whole disaster, and he listened to it again, and this time he heard the thing he had been too young and too proud to hear the first time. Turn back now, and we will let the ships that turn back leave. This is the last mercy we are required to offer. It had not been a taunt. It had been an instruction. A literal, precise, honest instruction, offered by a people who had learned, over 4 centuries, that the only kindness they could reliably give a proud enemy was to tell him the truth as many times as it took, and then keep their word when he refused it. On the 3rd day of folding, alone in the courier skiff, Kael Vurr received one last transmission. It came on the old band, the thermal flicker, the private channel he was never meant to hear. And it was the young human voice, the one that had sounded tired and sad, the one that had said now and started a war ending, and it was speaking, this time directly to him. "Adjutant Vurr, Kael, I know you can hear this because you're the one who always hears the thing you're not supposed to. My name is Sable. I ran the forge intake for this one. I'm the one who let your skiff go." Kael sat very still in the cold, small cabin. "I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry because I'm not exactly, and you'd know if I lied. Your War Master crossed a line that's been marked for 400 years, and he crossed it on purpose to prove it wasn't real. It was real. It was always real. But I am sorry it had to be you who watched and you who carries it. That's a heavy thing to give a young one. A pause. So I want to give you something back to carry alongside it. Are you listening? I'm listening, Kael said, though the channel was one way and no one could hear him. We didn't build the forge to win wars, Sable said. We built it so we'd never have to fight one. 400 years ago we made a choice, that we would rather be a place the galaxy was afraid of than a place the galaxy pitied. So we built a wall no one could climb, and then we spent 4 centuries warning everyone not to try, because a wall you have to use is a wall that failed. Every ship in that graveyard is a ship we couldn't talk out of dying. Every one of them is a failure, Kael. Not a trophy. A failure. We arrange them prow-out so the next fleet has to look at them, and we hope, every time, that looking is enough. The voice softened, and Kael heard in it something he had not expected to hear from the mouth that had ended his fleet. He heard grief, real and old and worn smooth. It's never enough for the proud ones, but it might be enough for you. So carry this home, adjutant, and tell it right the way your subcommander asked. Tell them the wall is real. Tell them we will keep our word always, the mercy and the rest of it both. And tell them the only way past the beacon is the way that was written on it the whole time. Turn back, that's it. That's the whole secret. That's the thing 11 empires died refusing to hear. A last pause, and Kael could have sworn the human smiled. You heard it. You're the first one in a very long time who heard it in time to live. Go home, Kael Vurr, and keep your fear. It's the best thing you've got. The channel closed. Kael Vurr folded on toward the threshold and toward home, and toward the hardest thing he would ever do, which was not surviving the forge but standing in front of the Ascendant Draven Imperium and telling it, in the high dialect of the throne, that everything it believed about strength and fear and the paint wall of human space had been exactly, catastrophically wrong. He did not know yet whether they would believe him. He knew only that he had promised to tell it right. But before the threshold, before the long 40 days of folding home, there was one more thing the courier skiff carried Kael Vurr through, and it was the worst thing, and it was the thing that made him a teller before the Imperium ever gave him the rank. On the 4th day of his flight, his fold drive faltered. It was not sabotage, and it was not the humans. It was simply that a War Master's courier skiff was built to carry a single triumphant dispatch on a single clean run home, and it had instead been driven at its limit through a dozen desperate short jumps out of a dying system, and something in its heart had cracked. The fold field collapsed mid-jump and dumped the skiff back into real space in a region the charts called empty, and the drive would not restart, and Kael Vurr found himself stranded, alone, in the deep cold between the stars, with the truth of the 6th incursion on a data core and no way to carry it anywhere. He did not panic. That surprised him later when he had time to be surprised by things. A younger Kael, the Kael of a week ago, the one who had stood on the observation gallery and believed the War Master's speech about fear being a disease, that Kael would have panicked. But the forge had burned something out of him and left something harder in its place, and the something harder sat down at the skiff's damaged console and began, methodically, to keep himself alive. He rationed the air. He shut down every system the skiff did not need to keep him breathing and to keep the data core intact, because the data core mattered more than his comfort and nearly as much as his life. He worked on the fold drive in shifts, learning its unfamiliar Draven engineering by touch and by the skiff's own terse maintenance logs. And when he was not working on it, he sat in the cold and the dark and he thought about everything he had seen. And he began, without meaning to shape it into the thing he would one day say. Because that was the strange gift of the stranding. It gave Kael Vurr time. Time to stop being a signals adjutant reacting to a disaster and to become a mind that understood it. In the burning present of the battle, he had only been able to see the arithmetic, the waves increasing, the fleet shrinking, the closed fist against the open sum. Now, in the vast still silence, he could see the whole architecture of it, 400 years deep. He understood, sitting there, why the humans had built the graveyard the way they built it. He had thought at first that it was cruelty, a boast, a wall of trophies, the same thing the Draven would have built if the Draven had ever won a war so total. But it was not a boast. A boast is aimed at the strong. The graveyard was aimed at the frightened, at the young signals officer reading his instruments as his fleet crossed the line. It was arranged prow-out not to say look what we did, but to say look what they did, these others, these 11 empires, who were exactly as certain as you are now. It was a mirror held up to arrogance, and the whole tragedy of it was that arrogance cannot see its own reflection. He understood why the humans warned in 600 languages and one universal set of symbols. Not to seem powerful, power does not translate itself into the tongue of the most primitive scout. To be understood, a people who wanted to be feared would have let the fear do its own work, ambiguous and enormous. A people who wanted to be believed would take pains, endless pains, to make the warning so clear that no one could claim they had not understood it. The humans had wanted, more than anything, for the warning to work. The graveyard was every time it had not. And he understood, finally, the thing about the young human voice that had haunted him since the red dark of the signal's pit. Why it had sounded tired and sad, and why it had grieved for a Draven boy it had never met. Sable and the others who ran the forge were not warriors savoring victory. They were the keepers of a wall their ancestors had built so that they would never have to fight, and every fleet that ignored the warning forced them to use the wall anyway, and using the wall meant killing, and killing a fleet that could have simply turned around was not a triumph. It was a failure. It was the wall failing at the only thing it was for, which was to be enough of a warning that no one had to die on it. Sable had sounded sad because Sable was watching a wall fail again, one more time, for the 400 and something time, and there was nothing to do but hold the forge steady and let the arithmetic grind and hope that this time, at least, one young one aboard would hear it and live. Kael had been that one young one. He knew it now, and somewhere in the cold and the dark of the stranding, he stopped grieving for himself and started grieving for them, for the humans, 400 years into a job they had never wanted, standing on a wall in the dark, warning and warning and warning a galaxy that answered every warning with a fleet. On the 6th day, he restarted the fold drive. He did it by hand, half of him certain it would tear the skiff apart when the field reformed, and he did it anyway because the alternative was to die slowly in the deep cold with the truth still aboard, and he had promised to tell it right, and a promise, he had decided somewhere in the dark, was the one wall a person could build that never fed the thing it kept out. The drive caught. The field held. The skiff folded, and Kael Vurr went on toward the threshold, and he was not the same young officer who had been dumped into that empty region 6 days before. He had gone in a survivor. He came out a witness. And there is a difference between the two, and the difference is the whole of why the Ascendant Draven Imperium turned back instead of dying. Because a survivor only carries the fact that a thing happened, but a witness carries the meaning of it, and it is the meaning, not the fact, that changes what an empire does next. He had one more thing to learn before the threshold, and the stranding taught him that too, in the last hour before the drive caught. He had been afraid in the cold that he would die there, genuinely, deeply afraid, in the way he had been taught all his life was a disease, and he had noticed that the fear did not weaken him. It sharpened him. It was the fear that made him ration the air, the fear that made him protect the data core, the fear that drove him back to the fold drive shift after shift when a fearless Draven would have sat proudly down and suffocated with his certainty intact. Fear had kept him alive in the cold exactly as it had kept him alive in the shadow of the forge, and Kael Vurr understood at last and all the way down that the single thing the Imperium had gotten most wrong, the thing at the root of every hull in that graveyard, was the lie that fear was weakness. Fear was information. Fear was the part of a mind that could still see a wall when pride had gone blind. The humans had built their entire border on the understanding that fear, properly heard, saves lives. that a warning is only useful to a people who have kept the sense that lets them heed it. The Draven had spent generations cutting that sense out of their finest men and calling the wound strength, and they had sent those maimed and fearless men to command their fleets, and the fearless men had walked those fleets straight into the one place in the galaxy where only fear could have saved them. Kael Vurr kept his fear. He carried it to the threshold, and to the chamber of the 9 suns, and to every academy and every fleet for the rest of his long life, and he taught 10,000 young Draven that it was the most valuable thing they owned. That was the true cargo of the courier skiff, not the data core, though the data core mattered. The true cargo was a boy who had learned, in the cold and the dark and the furnace light, that the sense his people had thrown away was the only sense that had ever kept anyone alive on the wrong side of a human wall. The threshold, when Kael reached it, was not empty. 211 ships of the 6th Incursion Fleet had made the fold before the forge closed its arithmetic around the rest. They had gathered at the beacon threshold, as Vanith's last order had told them to, and they hung there now in the space just outside human territory, in the shadow of the black obelisk and its slow-turning ring of the dead. 211 survivors of 412, and they had done a thing that no Draven fleet had ever done in the history of the Imperium. They had stopped, they had turned back, and they were waiting. Kael's skiff was small and battered, and it should have gone unremarked among the great warships, but the survivors had been watching the fold point for exactly one thing. Someone from the flagship, someone who could tell them whether the War Master's last order had been madness or mercy, whether they were heroes or cowards, whether they had abandoned Draven or been saved by him. When Kael's transponder resolved, when they saw the flagship's courier glyph on a skiff with a single young pilot and no fleet behind it, the whole threshold seemed to turn toward him at once. He was hailed by the senior surviving officer, a fleet captain named Orsu Danevoth, whose cruiser Iron Verdict had taken the point during the withdrawal and lost half her crew doing it. Danevoth's face on the comm was gray with exhaustion and something worse, the particular hollowness of a Draven officer who has done the unthinkable and turned back, and does not yet know if it makes him a survivor or a traitor. Adjutant Vurr, the fleet captain's voice was carefully empty. You come from the Meridian. Tell me the War Master fell fighting. Tell me the order to withdraw was his. Kael understood in that moment exactly how much depended on the next thing he said. 211 ships, thousands of Draven who had broken formation and run, and who would carry that for the rest of their lives, and whether they carried it as shame or as sense depended entirely on the story that got told about it here, now, at the threshold, in the shadow of the dead. He could lie. He could give the fleet captain the clean story. The War Master ordered the withdrawal. The War Master saved you. You obeyed a War Master's command, and there is no shame in it. It would be easier. It would let 200 survivors sleep. And it would be exactly the kind of comfortable, honorable, face-saving story that had killed 11 empires, because it would leave the truth of the Forge buried under a lie about Draven glory, and the next War Master who wanted to prove the wall was paint would find nothing in the record to stop him. Kael had promised to tell it right. The War Master fell fighting, he said. That part is true, fleet captain, and you may carry it home with your head high, but the order to withdraw was not his. It was Sub-Commander Vanith's, and it was sent over my hand, and the War Master fought it before he understood it. I will not let you build a comfortable lie on the Meridian's bones. You did not survive because a War Master commanded it. You survived because 2 men beneath him could imagine losing and he could not, and by the time he could it was too late for anything but courage. Kael's voice did not shake. He had learned, somewhere between the forge and the threshold, that it would not shake when he told the truth. The War Master's last act was to send me home with the truth instead of a victory dispatch. Honor him for that. It was the bravest thing he ever did, and the hardest, because it meant admitting the beacon was right. The threshold was silent. 211 ships listening. "You're saying," Danvoth said slowly, "that we turned back because we were beaten, not because we were commanded, that we ran." "I am saying you lived because you turned back," Kael said. "The same as the beacon told us all to do 400 years ago. I am saying the humans did not defeat the Draven fleet captain. The Draven defeated the Draven. The humans only built the wall and then told us in 600 languages for 4 centuries exactly how not to die on it. And we came anyway to prove we were too great to be warned." He gestured, though the fleet captain could not see it, at the ring of the dead turning slowly outside his hull. "Look at the graveyard. Really look at it." Every ship in that ring belonged to someone who could not stand to be told to turn back. The Volgai, the Suli, the Chthonians, and now the 6th incursion, except that 211 of us are not in the ring, fleet captain, because for the first time in 400 years a Draven fleet did the one thing all of them refused. It turned back. That is not shame. That is the only thing in the entire history of this beacon that anyone can be proud of. For a long moment Danvoth stared at him from the comm screen. And then, slowly, the gray hollowness in the old officer's face changed, not into pride, not yet, but into something Kael recognized because he had felt it himself in the red dark of the signal's pit. It was the look of a man deciding to keep his fear instead of cutting it out. The look of a mind letting the terrible truth in, because the alternative was to die of the comfortable lie. "Send me your data core," Danvoth said at last. "All of it. The logs, the scans, the human transmissions. Every ship in this formation will carry a copy so that if one of us is lost on the way home, the truth still arrives. And Vurr," the fleet captain's voice roughened, "you will tell it to the throne yourself. I will not have this reach the Imperium second-hand, filed and softened by men who were not there. You watched the Meridian die. You carried the War Master's last order. You are the mouth. The throne will hear it from the mouth." The journey home took 40 days, and Kael spent every one of them being afraid in the right way. He was afraid of the throne. Any Draven would be. The Ascendant Council sat at the heart of the Imperium in a chamber that had never in 900 years heard the word defeat spoken about a Draven fleet, and Kael Vurr, barely old enough to bear a rank glyph, was flying home to speak it. He was afraid they would not believe him. He was afraid they would believe him and kill him for it, because a truth that shames an empire often kills its mouth first and reckons with the truth later. He was afraid, most of all, that he would tell it wrong, that at the last moment his nerve would fail, and he would soften the thing into a story about Draven valor and a worthy foe, and the forge would go on waiting in the dark for the next fleet, and the next forever. He rehearsed it 1,000 times in the cold cabin of the skiff. He read the data core until he could recite the forge's arithmetic in his sleep. He listened, again and again, to Sable's last transmission, the young human voice telling him the whole secret was written on the beacon the entire time. Turn back. That's it. That's the thing 11 empires died refusing to hear. And slowly, over 40 days, the fear stopped being terror and became something else. It became resolve. Because Vaneth had been right, in the end, about the thing that mattered most. Fear was not a disease. Fear was the sense that let you see the wall for what it was. The War Master had cut his out and died of a picture he could not let himself see. Kael had kept his, and it had made him the only Draven in 400 years to cross into human space and come home understanding why he should not have. The Imperium met the returning fleet at the great orbital fortress of Draven Prime with an honor formation, because they did not yet know. They had received Dralvan's departure dispatch, full of confidence, promising a human world underfoot by the end of the cycle, and they had not heard from the 6th incursion since, and they had assumed, in the way empires assume, that silence meant a conquest too total to bother reporting. When 211 ships folded home instead of 412, and when they folded home in the tight defensive formation of a fleet that had run, the honor formation faltered, and the whole vast machinery of Draven Prime went very quiet, and the word that no one had ever spoken began to move through the fortress like a cold current. They brought Kael Vurr before the Ascendant Council in the Chamber of the Nine Suns, and he was so young among them, and the great and ancient lords of the Imperium looked down at the boy who had come home from human space with the truth on a data core, and they asked him, in the high dialect of the throne, to tell them what had become of the 6th Incursion Fleet. And Kael Vurr told it right. He told them all of it. He did not soften it, and he did not decorate it. He stood in the center of the Chamber of the Nine Suns, under the 9 burning globes that were meant to remind every Draven who entered that the Imperium had conquered 9 systems in a single generation, and he told the Ascendant Council the whole shape of the thing. He told them about the beacon, and how it had not lied, not once in 400 years. He told them about the Ring of the Dead, the Volgai and the Suli and the Chthonians arranged prow-out as a warning that 11 empires had mistaken for a boast. He told them about the War Master's certainty, and how it had been the finest and the most fatal thing about him, how a man who has never lost cannot picture losing, and so cannot see the loss when it stands in front of him wearing furnace light. And he told them about the forge. That was the part the council could not hold. Kael watched it hit them, one ancient lord at a time, the thing that was not a fleet, the moon-sized factory that ate the attacks meant to destroy it, the arithmetic that grew, the closed fist of the fleet against the open sum of the enemy. He watched the eldest of them, Lord Ascendant Vesh Morankal, who had sat on the council since before Kael's grandfather was born, lean forward and say, in a voice gone thin with the effort of belief, "You are telling us that the more we fought it, the stronger it became. That there was no point of victory, that the machine could not be beaten because beating it was what fed it." "Yes, Lord Ascendant. That cannot be a defense. A defense that cannot be overcome by any force is not a weapon." "It is." The old lord groped for the word, and Kael gave it to him gently because he had spent 40 days learning to hold it himself. "It is a wall, Lord Ascendant. That is exactly what it is. The humans did not build a weapon. They built a wall, and then they spent 400 years standing on top of it, telling everyone who came near not to climb it because they did not want to have to use it. The beacon was not a threat. It was mercy. Every ship in that graveyard is a mercy the humans failed to give, a fleet they could not talk out of dying. They arrange the dead prow-out and they hope, every time, that the sight will be enough. It was never enough, not for the proud ones." Kael looked up at the 9 burning suns and then back at the council, "But it can be enough for us. If we are the first empire wise enough to be warned." The chamber was silent. 9 ancient lords under 9 false suns, and a young officer in the center, and between them the heaviest thing in the history of the Imperium. The question of what a great people does when it discovers, too late, that it was wrong. "You are asking us," said Morankal slowly, "to do the one thing the Draven have never done, to turn back, to leave a border unconquered, to let the galaxy see that there is a place the Ascendant Draven Imperium looked upon and chose not to take." "I am asking you to do the bravest thing the Draven have ever done," Kael said. "Anyone can conquer, Lord Ascendant. 11 empires conquered their way straight into that graveyard. It takes nothing but pride to die on a wall. It takes something the Draven have never yet spent to look at the wall and understand it and turn away with the fleet intact. The War Master could not do it until the end. 211 ships did it and came home, and the Imperium calls it a defeat. I am asking the Council to call it what it was. The first time in 400 years that anyone survived the beacon by believing it. He had one thing left. He had saved it because Vanith had taught him that a truth lands hardest last. "The humans sent me home on purpose," Kael said. "They let my skiff go when they could have unmade it as easily as they unmade the Meridian. They did it so the Imperium would have a mouth. And the human who let me go, a young one, Lord Ascendant, no older than I am, asked me to carry one thing back to you above all the rest. She said, 'The wall is real, the mercy is real, and we will keep our word always, both halves of it. Turn back and we let you go. Come again and there is no second warning. That is the whole of it. That is the thing 11 empires died refusing to hear. She asked me to tell it right. He lowered his eye ridges all the way, the deepest submission a Draven could offer, not to the council, he realized as he did it, but to the truth itself. So I have. That is the report of the 6th Incursion Fleet. The rest is the council's to decide. They deliberated for 9 days. Kael was not present for it, and he never learned everything that was said in that chamber under the false suns, but he learned the shape of it afterward, because a thing that large cannot be entirely hidden. There were lords who wanted to build a 2nd fleet, and a 3rd, and to prove that Draven persistence could outlast any wall, until the arithmetic of the forge was set before them plainly, and they understood that persistence was precisely the food the wall ate. There were lords who wanted Kael Vurr executed, quietly, so that the truth would die in a young throat, and the Imperium could go on believing its border was a matter of will rather than fact. And there was Kael, oldest of them all, who had watched the boy stand under the 9 suns and speak defeat aloud without letting his voice shake, and who said, at the end of the 9th day, the words that changed the course of the Ascendant Draven Imperium. The child kept his fear, the old lord said, and it made him the only one of us who could see. We cut ours out generations ago and called it strength, and it walked our finest fleet into a furnace. If we execute the boy for seeing clearly, we will have to send another fleet to learn the same lesson, and another until the graveyard at that beacon wears the Draven name on every hull. I have sat on this council for 200 years. I will not spend my last decades feeding my people to a wall to preserve the comfort of a lie. The border stands. We do not cross it, and the truth this boy carried home will be taught to every Draven cadet before they are taught to walk, in place of the lie we taught before it. That fear is a disease. It is not a disease. It is the sense that keeps an empire alive. So the Ascendant Draven Imperium turned back. It was not announced as a defeat. Empires do not announce defeats. But it was not hidden as one either, and that was the thing that mattered, the thing Kael had bled for at the threshold, and under the 9 suns the truth was written into the record, whole and unsoftened, so that no future warmaster could find in the archives a comfortable story about Draven valor and a worthy foe. What he would find instead was the forge, the arithmetic, the graveyard, and the report of a young signals adjutant who had kept his fear and told it right. They did not make Kael Vurr an admiral. His bloodline had wanted an admiral, and instead it got something the Vurr line had never produced in 9 generations, something the Imperium had never had a use for until the day it learned it could lose. They made him a teller. It was a new rank, invented for him, and its whole duty was to carry the truth of the beacon to every fleet, every academy, every young Draven who might one day stand on a command tier and feel the old itch to prove that a wall was only paint. He spent the rest of his life doing it. He was very good at it, because he never once let the story become comfortable, and he never once let them forget that the humans had warned them, and warned them, and warned them, and kept their word to the letter when the Draven refused to listen. Years later, many years, when Kael Vurr was no longer young, though he had been young for the only part of this that mattered, a Draven survey vessel passed near the beacon at the edge of human space, on a lawful course that did not cross the line. And on the old band, the thermal flicker, the survey's signals officer caught a private transmission that was not meant for a fleet. A low voice dropped into the dark like a stone into a well. It was a human voice, older now, but Kael's translator knew it because Kael had made every signals officer in the Imperium learn it. Sable, still there, still keeping the wall. Draven survey vessel, the voice said. You're on a clean course, you're not crossing the line. Good, tell the teller his lesson took. In 400 years the Draven are the first who ever heard the warning and turned. Tell him we noticed. Tell him it's the only time the graveyard didn't have to grow. A pause, and even across the years and the cold, Kael would swear when they played it back to him that the human was smiling. And tell him he told it right. The survey vessel held its course. It did not cross the line. and the beacon at the edge of human space went on writing its warning into the dark. In 600 tongues and one set of symbols any survivor could read, "Turn back. This is human space. You have been warned. We will not warn you twice." And for the first time in 400 years, on the far side of that black obelisk, there was an empire that had heard it and believed it and lived. Kael Vurr was an old Draven the day they brought him that recording, and he had told the truth 10,000 times by then, and he thought he had felt everything a teller could feel. But he wept when he heard it, the same honest way he had wept alone in the courier skiff, all those years ago, flying home with the truth and no victory. Because he understood, at last, the whole of the thing the young human had tried to give him in the cold dark between the forge and the threshold. The humans had never wanted to be feared. They had wanted to be believed. The beacon and the graveyard and the moon-sized forge waiting banked in the shadow, all of it, 400 years of it, was one exhausted people saying the same thing over and over to a galaxy too proud to hear it. "We do not want to fight you, so please, please, let the warning be enough." And 11 empires had made them prove it, and hated them for the proof, and called them monsters for the graveyard they had built out of the mercy no one would accept. Kael had been the first to accept it. A young Draven who never cut out his fear, on a doomed flagship in the shadow of a dark world, who heard a warning that was really a plea, and believed it in time to live and carried it home and told it right. That was the whole of it. That was the thing 11 empires died refusing to hear, and one young officer lived by hearing. The galaxy was warned to stay out of human space. One empire ignored the warning, and then, alone in 400 years, that same empire produced a single young voice honest enough to bring the warning home. The beacon still burns at the edge of the dark. The graveyard still turns, prow-out patient. And somewhere in the Imperium's oldest archive, first among the lessons taught to every Draven child before they are taught to walk, is the truth a boy named Kael Vurr carried out of the furnace, that the bravest thing a great people can ever do is not to conquer a wall, but to be wise enough at last to turn back.